I had been dating Felix for 2 years and married for 3. He promised me a grand wedding, but at the moment of the vows, he publicly fled the wedding. This was solely because his white moonlight, his unattainable love, was terminally ill, and he wanted to accompany her through her final days. But Felix didn't know that her medical records were forged. And the funeral he was invited to attend, the one lying in the urn, was actually me. Today was supposed to be my wedding day with Felix. I walked step by step towards him in a pure white wedding dress. I had been waiting for this day for 5 years. Just as we were exchanging rings with affectionate gazes, Felix's phone rang. I caught a glimpse of the caller ID and unconsciously tightened my grip on his wrist. But Felix still ignored everything and interrupted the ceremony to answer the call. On the other end was Sharon, his white moonlight, sobbing. After hanging up, Felix hurriedly said to me, "I can't marry you as planned today. Sharon is sick, and I'm afraid something might happen to her alone." As soon as he finished speaking, he quickly left, and I couldn't catch up with him. The guests below were in an uproar, whispering among themselves. "What's going on? Why did the groom run away? The ceremony isn't even finished yet. Is the wedding still happening? Did the groom have second thoughts at the last minute?" Hearing the crowd's discussions, my tears flowed uncontrollably. I could only hold back my emotions and say to everyone, "The groom had to leave suddenly for an emergency. Please enjoy the food and drinks today and have a good time." The host looked at me several times, wanting to say something but holding back. He proceeded with the lucky draw as planned. Before the wedding banquet even ended, the news of Felix's unexplained flight from the wedding had already made headlines in Jiangqing. I held back my tears until the very end of the banquet. Watching our photo slideshow on the big screen, my heart sank completely. Sharon was Felix's unattainable love. If she hadn't gone abroad with her rich boyfriend back then, Felix might never have noticed me, who had always been quietly by his side. We had been together for 5 years and married for 3. I thought we would always be in love until 3 months ago when I suddenly experienced unbearable stomach pain and went to the hospital for a checkup. Over the years, I had worked hard for my career, and my stomach was already in a terrible state. The diagnosis of late-stage stomach cancer hit me like a bolt from the blue, draining all my motivation. I urged Felix to move up the wedding date, wanting to have the most beautiful memories in the final days of my life. Felix had always promised to give me the grandest wedding in Jiangqing, and he did. All the wedding decorations were extremely luxurious, using my favorite pink and white color scheme. Even my wedding dress was designed and rushed by an internationally renowned designer. However, in the end, I couldn't compete with his white moonlight. This time, I lost completely. No matter how much time passed, as long as Sharon called, Felix would still rush to her without hesitation. Perhaps due to overwhelming sadness, my stomach pain was so severe that I could hardly stand up straight. On the way to the hospital in a taxi, the driver noticed the large beads of sweat on my forehead and asked with concern, "In your condition, shouldn't you have someone close to accompany you?" I shook my head and replied, "No need, I can manage." I didn't know how to explain, as I came from a broken family, and they wouldn't even attend my wedding together. At the hospital, after receiving pain relief medication, the doctor earnestly advised me to believe in medicine, saying that chemotherapy could reduce some of the pain. But I knew my condition well and had consulted many experts. Even with chemotherapy, it would only prolong my life a little, it couldn't cure me. Rather than spending my days isolated in a chemotherapy ward, I preferred to use the remaining time to see more of the world. After returning home, I began packing my clothes. I waited until midnight, but there was no message from Felix. I sent him 3 messages asking him to come back when he had time to talk. The messages went unanswered, like stones sinking into the sea. Early the next morning, Felix returned home exhausted and shouted, "Lynn, come down and help me change clothes." Having suffered from stomach pain all night, I endured the discomfort and went downstairs. Felix had a cleanliness obsession. After we graduated from university and started living together, every time he came home, he insisted that I prepare his pajamas for him to change into before he would enter the house. Seeing me empty-handed, he said to me very displeased, "Lynn, didn't you hear me? Where are the pajamas?" When I still didn't move, he pushed me and asked, "Are you still angry because I left midway yesterday? Try to understand me. Sharon is sick and might not have 2 years left. Her parents passed away early, and she only has me. Can't you be a little more understanding?" As soon as he finished speaking, my nose tingled, and I started crying. Seeing his impatient face, I whispered, "She's sick, but have you ever cared about me? I'm sick too." Felix frowned and clicked his tongue, saying, "What illness could you possibly have? Don't scare yourself." Immediately after, he took out a jewelry box from his bag and handed it to me, saying, "This is a gift from Sharon to you. She was afraid you would blame her for affecting the wedding. I told her you wouldn't mind, you're not that petty." I looked up at him for a moment, then slowly opened the jewelry box. Inside was a green brooch. I said deliberately, "What a great color choice." Felix glanced at me twice, handed me his phone, and said, "Call her to say thank you. This afternoon, take her to Ruijin to buy a gift in return. Be polite." Sharon's brooch looked like something picked up from a 10 yuan store for me, yet Felix wanted me to reciprocate with a gift worth 100 times more. After I clearly expressed my refusal, Felix angrily said to me, "Lynn, why have you become so unreasonable? She's a patient, you should be nicer to her. It's not like I can't afford it. Yes, you're not short of money now. If you were, Sharon wouldn't even contact you." Back then, Felix confessed to Sharon 3 times and was coldly rejected each time, simply because he was poor in university. He even had to eat plain steamed buns for a month to save up for a luxury brand bag to give her. As soon as he finished speaking, Felix's phone rang again. While answering the call, he opened the door, and Sharon walked in with a smile, pushing her suitcase. I looked at her rosy complexion, she didn't look like someone gravely ill at all. Even I could notice that, so how could Felix not see it? She didn't even change into slippers and sat down on the sofa by herself, pointing at me and saying, "Please make me a glass of orange juice, I'm so thirsty." I glanced at her feet, waiting for Felix to get angry. But instead, he smiled and said, "Is 1 glass enough? How about 2? Then they both stared at me, and I pointed to myself, asking, "Me?" Felix replied coldly, "Who else? Sharon is a patient, and the doctor said she needs to eat more fruits to supplement vitamins." I deliberately asked, "What kind of problem does she have?" Sharon pouted and replied, "Stomach cancer." What a coincidence in this world. She had the same illness as me. But my doctor clearly reminded me to eat fewer citrus fruits as they can cause excessive stomach acid. The juicer at home was frequently used because before I got sick, I would make myself a glass of vegetable and fruit juice every morning after exercising. When I quickly made the juice and handed it to Sharon, she asked unhappily, "Did you not wash it clean? How did you make it so fast?" No matter how I explained that it was already clean, Felix still made me make 2 more glasses. Listening to Sharon's coy voice, I felt a wave of nausea. Seeing this, Felix rushed to my side and angrily asked, "What's wrong with you? She's a patient, how can you treat her like this?" I wanted to tell him that recently, I felt nauseous even with slight discomfort, which was my normal physiological reaction. Thinking back, whenever I had a slight headache or fever, Felix would be very worried and even take me to the hospital at night. Now, even though my lips were pale and I clearly showed signs of physical discomfort, he turned a blind eye, thinking I was just expressing dissatisfaction with Sharon. I handed the juice to Sharon again, but her hand slipped, and the glass fell to the ground, spilling juice everywhere. Sharon immediately jumped up and shouted, "Oh, what's wrong with you? Are you bullying me because I'm sick and can't hold it steady? Are you doing this on purpose?" Seeing her fierce expression, I immediately replied unhappily, "Miss Sharon, you really know how to play the victim." I was holding it steadily, how did it become my intention? Seeing this, Sharon threw herself into Felix's arms, crying, "I just wanted to come and apologize to her, but she was so fierce to me. Everyone is bullying me, I don't want to live anymore." Half a year ago, I was falsely accused by a colleague of carelessly losing a hard drive. When Felix found out I was wronged, he immediately found evidence to vindicate me. He once told me that he wouldn't allow anyone to bully me. I thought it would be the same this time. He gently patted Sharon's back to comfort her, then glared at me and said, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and apologize to Sharon, you've scared her to tears." I was stunned and said, "Apologize? Felix, didn't you see? I didn't slip on purpose, she just didn't hold it properly." As soon as I finished speaking, Sharon clutched her stomach and cried, "My stomach hurts so much, brother. I feel really unwell now." Upon hearing this, Felix immediately became nervous, picked her up, and was about to go to the hospital, but I stopped him. I grabbed his wrist and said, "I have painkillers, taking 2 for stomach pain will do." But Felix pushed me away and shouted, "Do you know what illness Sharon has? Can you just take any medicine?" He pushed me with great force, and I lost my balance, hitting my leg on the corner of the coffee table, instantly causing blood to flow. Seeing this, Felix asked nervously, "Are you okay? Do you need to go to the hospital?" He knew I had hemophobia, the sight of blood would make my whole body tremble uncontrollably. But Sharon wrapped her arms around his neck and continued to whimper, "Brother, can you take me to the hospital first? I can't stand the pain." Felix looked at me for a moment and said, "I'll take her first, her condition is more urgent. You can take a taxi to handle it yourself." As they left, Sharon's eyes were filled with the smile of a victor. But looking at her rosy complexion without a single bead of sweat on her forehead, she didn't look like a stomach cancer patient at all. After all, in the past 6 months, whenever I had stomach pain, my face would be as pale as a ghost, and my whole body would often be soaked in sweat. The best medical care in Jiangqing is at the first hospital. Half believing, I dragged my bleeding leg and followed them to the hospital. I searched the gastroenterology department but couldn't find Sharon anywhere. I had to pretend that I couldn't find my relative and went to the director's office to ask if a patient named Sharon had come for treatment. The doctors all shook their heads. My attending physician trusted me and checked the system for me again. From this, I guessed that Sharon must have used some means to convince Felix not to come to the hospital, fearing exposure. After returning home, I didn't have the energy to cook, so I sat in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, recalling all the past moments with Felix. I wanted to go to the study to find some letter paper to leave some memories for Felix. By chance, I found an iron box at the bottom of the study. Felix and I didn't share the study, and I rarely went into his study. When I slowly opened the iron box, I found a letter inside written by 20-year-old Felix to Sharon, every word filled with deep affection. There was also a photo of Felix and Sharon standing at Mount Everest, and the way he looked at Sharon was with a tenderness I had never seen before. I loved mountain climbing and had always pestered Felix to accompany me after we got married. But he always replied impatiently, "I'm afraid of heights, you know that." Yet, clearly, at 20 years old, he had accompanied Sharon to climb the highest peak. The man who repeatedly said he would always love me and never leave me had actually been hiding his white moonlight in his heart all along, even willing to overcome his inner fears for her. Thinking about the messages from friends and relatives these past 2 days, overtly and covertly inquiring if I had been kicked out by Felix, hatred surged in my heart. I had originally planned to walk with Felix to the end of my life, him not to be too sad for me, and to be with a suitable girl if he met one. But now, I didn't want to see him happy. I didn't want to see a liar and a mistress happy. I began to contact a private detective, asking him to take photos of Felix and Sharon together. I also went out to buy a diary and started recording everything that had happened along the way. I also went to the funeral home to carefully select a cemetery plot for myself. The attendant asked who in my family I was buying it for, choosing so carefully. I pointed to myself and said lightly, "It's for myself. Since I couldn't get love while alive, I want to be good to myself after death." While the attendant was stunned, with a ding from my phone, I received the first-hand information from the private detective. Felix had taken that stomach cancer patient to the place he was supposed to take me. In the photo, Felix was happily having lunch with Sharon at a terrace restaurant, and Sharon was wearing a dazzling bracelet on her wrist. That bracelet was the one Felix had bought for $1 million at an auction half a month ago, which even made the news in Jiangqing. I had always thought that the bracelet was bought by Felix for me because I liked blue. Now it seems I was really like a clown. That restaurant was also the one Felix had promised to take me to after the wedding, saying it was a surprise for me. Now it seems that with Sharon's appearance, those words no longer counted. After buying the cemetery plot and coming out, my stomach started to ache intermittently. I realized I hadn't eaten anything since I woke up in the morning. The stomach medicine at home was finished, so I had to endure the pain and take a taxi to the hospital. At the registration desk, I ran into Felix. He looked at my registration form with a cold face and said, "Since we met, after you see the doctor, come to the inpatient department." As a man, I can't take care of everything properly. I wanted to refuse on the grounds of feeling unwell, but he insisted that I must go. "You're still standing here fine, what big problem could you have? Hurry up after you're done." Before I could get my medicine, Felix called me to pack 2 servings of shrimp porridge from Taihalu, saying Sharon wanted to eat it. I just asked, if she's seriously ill and hospitalized, shouldn't she avoid seafood? Felix angrily retorted, "Just buy it when I tell you to, why ask so many questions?" Taihalu was on the top floor inside the mall, and it was during the evening rush hour, so the taxi could only drop me off nearby. Felix probably forgot that my knee was just injured, and I gritted my teeth to buy the porridge. When I arrived at the ward door, I saw Sharon leaning on Felix's shoulder, chatting. Before the wedding, when Felix was inviting university classmates, someone had mentioned whether to invite Sharon. I took the opportunity to ask him, "Do you still have feelings for Sharon?" That day, Felix hugged me tightly and said affectionately, "How could I? You are the only one in my eyes and heart." Looking at their sweet backs now, I suddenly felt like a clown. Sharon caught a glimpse of me at the door with her peripheral vision. She then cupped Felix's face and said, "Brother, you will always be with me, right?" Felix fondly touched her hair and replied, "Of course, I will always be with you." At that moment, my foot accidentally kicked the door frame, and they both turned to stare at me. Felix got up, opened the door with a displeased face, and said, "Why are you so late?" "Sharon is hungry, hurry up." Sharon batted her eyes at me and said coyly, "Thank you for your trouble today. After delivering, you can leave first. I don't like having strangers sitting next to me while eating." After she said that, I retorted angrily, "Do you always book the entire restaurant when you eat out?" Seeing my angry face, Sharon pulled Felix's arm and said softly, "Brother, she's so fierce, she scared me." Felix immediately darkened his face and pointed to the door, saying, "Sharon is a patient, just do whatever she says. You're an adult, don't you know better? You've scared her." As soon as he finished speaking, Sharon added, "She scared me, she should apologize to me, right?" I immediately retorted angrily, "Apologize? You can forget." Before I could finish the word about, Felix interrupted me. He glared at me and nodded, saying, "Hurry up and apologize to Sharon." I snorted coldly and kicked the table hard. The force was too strong, and the just-opened porridge instantly spilled all over the floor. Sharon pointed at me angrily and scolded, "Even if you have a problem with me, you can't knock over my dinner." After saying that, seeing that I didn't move, Felix rushed up, grabbed my wrist with red eyes, and said, "What exactly do you want?" I forcefully shook off his hand and replied, "I didn't do it on purpose." In the past, even if I just cut my finger, Felix would be so nervous that he wanted to take me to the hospital. Now, with such a large bandage on my knee, he chose to ignore it. He would even glare at me because of Sharon's casual words. Seeing that I was about to leave, Felix rushed over to stop me and said, "Clean it up before you go, otherwise, who do you expect to do it?" Although I was very unhappy, he stood with his hands on his hips blocking the door, so I had to grit my teeth and do it. No one noticed the pride flashing in Sharon's eyes. After cleaning up, the bandage on my leg was soaked with blood. Felix stared at my knee for a moment, then turned his head away, ignoring it. I lowered my head and turned to leave the ward. After changing the dressing, it started pouring rain in Jiangqing. Without an umbrella, I hesitated at the hospital entrance. The doctor had advised me that my immunity was low now, and I should avoid catching a cold. I had to muster the courage to call Felix, hoping he could give me a ride. I called 3 times before it was answered. It was Sharon who picked up, and she said very unhappily, "Brother left his phone in the ward and went out to buy me dinner. What do you want with him?" Before I could speak, Sharon continued, "Brother said he will be at the hospital with me recently, so don't look for him." As soon as she finished, the phone went beep beep. I had no choice but to rush into the rain to the hospital entrance to hail a taxi. On the way back, I was completely soaked and shivering. The driver asked with concern, "You look pale, go back and take a hot shower and some medicine." See, even a stranger's concern was warmer than that of my husband, Felix. I stared at the bustling traffic outside the window, my nose tingled, and the falling rain mixed with tears streamed down. After getting home, I took a hot shower and almost fainted, nearly falling to the ground. I endured the pain, leaned on the wall, and took my medicine. At that moment, I received a friend request on Instagram, and I recognized the profile picture as Sharon's at first glance. After hesitating, I accepted it. Once added, she sent me more than a dozen photos at once. They were all pictures of Felix accompanying her in the ward. After looking at them one by one, I closed my phone. Seeing that I didn't reply for a long time, Sharon sent a message straightforwardly saying, "Brother even fled the wedding, why don't you just let him go?" These past few days, every night I dreamed of the scene of Felix fleeing the wedding, and every morning I woke up with my pillow soaked. Sharon knew how to stab me in the heart. I continued to remain silent, lying on the bed with a dizzy head, thinking about what to do next. Seeing that I ignored her, Sharon actually called me via voice message. I answered impatiently, and Sharon angrily questioned me, "Are you blind? Why didn't you reply to my messages?" I replied indifferently, "I don't want to reply." Then Sharon continued, "I'm telling you to voluntarily withdraw and give brother back to me. Did you hear that?" At that moment, Felix's voice came from the other end, asking, "Who are you talking to?" Sharon paused and said, "An unimportant person." Felix said gently to her, "Come and have dinner." Sharon replied okay and hung up the phone. At that moment, I suddenly remembered that I had been busy bringing them dinner and cleaning the floor, and I hadn't had time to eat myself. After graduation, I worked hard and often forgot to eat on time. That's how my stomach problems developed. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but open the food delivery app, but after looking around, my stomach hurt so much that I had no interest in anything. This was the marital home of Felix and me, with our photo still on the bedside. When we took that set of photos, I had a high fever and was in very poor physical condition, so the results were not very satisfactory. Felix comforted me, saying that we had a long time ahead, and promised to take me to take a set of photos every anniversary as a memento. Scenes of our once sweet past played in my mind, and I couldn't help but cry again while holding the photo. My phone kept flashing, Sharon was still sending me photos to provoke me. I hardly slept all night until morning when I heard noises outside the door. Felix returned home exhausted, carrying breakfast. He gently pushed open the door and said, "I bought breakfast for you, come out and eat." I went downstairs sleepily and was shocked to see the table full of breakfast. Felix sat down and said softly, "Rest well today, there's an important banquet tonight, and you'll accompany me." I was wondering why Felix had changed his attitude, but his words shattered all my doubts and fantasies. After Felix started his business, I often accompanied him to social events and negotiations. Felix praised my high emotional intelligence, saying I could always help him solve problems. Now, seeing his attentive face, my heart sank to the bottom. He looked at my pale face and asked, "Are you unwell? Why do you look so bad?" I said with a cold face, "It was raining heavily yesterday, and I called you," but Sharon answered. "I originally wanted you to give me a ride." Felix said with a surprised face, "You called me?" I hummed and nodded. Felix suspiciously opened his phone and handed it to me, saying, "There's no record, did you remember wrong?" I couldn't help but laugh. Felix's first reaction was that I remembered wrong, not that Sharon lied. Felix paused for a few seconds, held my hand, and said, "Sharon is a patient. Sometimes if she does something wrong, please be more tolerant and don't hold it against her." Perhaps because of the fever, the smell of the food made my stomach uncomfortable. I hugged the trash can and vomited. Felix gently patted my back and asked, "What's wrong with you? Do you need to go to the hospital?" After cleaning up, I shook my head and replied, "It's just my old stomach problem, it's nothing." Felix frowned and said, "I told you not to work too hard, I can support you now." Since becoming the CEO, Felix had mentioned several times that I should quit my job and come back to serve him full-time, but I refused. After saying that, he glanced at the trash can and pointed at it in panic, saying, "Blood, why is there blood?" I looked down, calmly took away the garbage bag. Stomach bleeding was already a basic symptom for me. Felix was about to say something when his phone rang again. I caught a glimpse of the caller ID on Felix's phone. It was Sharon calling. Felix walked aside to answer the call. Although I was a bit far away, I still heard Sharon saying she was unwell and asking Felix to hurry back to accompany her. After hanging up, Felix grabbed his coat and was about to leave in a hurry. I stopped him and said, "Didn't you say we were going to have dinner together tonight? Stay today, and let's have a good talk." Felix gently patted my hand and explained, "Sharon is unwell, I'll go to the hospital first. Once she's better, I'll come back, okay?" I knew that even if I forced him to stay, his heart had already flown to the hospital. I waved my hand and let him go. Looking at the table full of untouched breakfast, I had no mood to enjoy it alone. I went back to my room to continue perfecting my diary. I recorded everything in detail, including what happened and my state of mind at the time. Until the afternoon, even after taking a nap, I still hadn't received any message from Felix. While writing my diary, Sharon sent me a message, "I advise you to let go. As long as I beckon, brother will abandon you at any time." I didn't reply. Actually, what Felix did now was no longer important to me. The medical report had been in my bag for a long time. I originally planned to confess to Felix after the wedding, hoping he could take some time to take me to see the great rivers and mountains of our motherland, but now it seemed unimportant. In the evening, Felix sent his secretary to pick me up to go to the private clothing store to change. I called him saying I was unwell and didn't want to go, but he refused me in a commanding tone. I reluctantly went to the private clothing store. Over the years, every time I accompanied Felix to events, I came here, and the makeup artists knew me. I chose several dresses in a row, but they were all replaced due to size issues. The makeup artist looked at me and said, "You seem to have lost a lot of weight recently. Previously, my size was S, but now even that was a whole size too big." Before I finished my makeup, there was a commotion outside. This private clothing store was usually very quiet, and just as I was puzzled, the door was pushed open. Sharon walked to my side with a smile and said, "Tonight, I am brother's female companion." Then she pointed to the dress I had already changed into and said, "I want this one, make her take it off." The makeup artist knew my identity, as Felix used to accompany me here, and refused her with a cold face. Unexpectedly, Sharon directly slapped the makeup artist and shouted, "When I tell you to do something, you do it, it's not your place to say no." I stood up angrily and blocked in front of the makeup artist, saying, "Sharon, who gave you the right to hit people without reason?" After that, Sharon snorted twice and said, "You don't need to teach me how to do things. Take off your clothes and give them to me, and you can leave." Sharon's figure was different from mine, the clothes that fit me might not fit her. But I didn't want to argue with her too much. After changing out of the dress, I threw it directly at Sharon's face. Sharon wanted to rush up to teach me a lesson, but then Felix appeared. Sharon quickly complained, "Brother," she threw the clothes at my face and almost scratched it. After that, Felix grabbed my wrist fiercely and said, "If you're so unwilling, then get lost." As I left, Sharon snorted at me and echoed, "Clown, hurry up and get lost." That night, sweet photos of Felix and Sharon attending the banquet made the trending searches. Everyone praised them as a perfect match. I slowly closed my phone, holding back the tears that were about to fall. Because of my willfulness, Felix didn't come home for several days and didn't contact me. 2 days later was my birthday, probably the last birthday of my life. I booked a terrace restaurant in advance, went to the mall to choose a gift for Felix, and sent him the location. He didn't reply a single word. In these 2 days, I went to the company to handle the resignation procedures. The HR told me that when they received my leave application, they felt I wouldn't come back to work. I smiled and didn't tell them the truth, just said I wanted to change my living environment. My colleagues from the company were also at the wedding that day, and they knew what had happened. Before I left, they gave me a farewell gift. The company management was very humane. No matter whose birthday it was, the team would give a thoughtful gift. They said they wouldn't attend the birthday party but wished me all the best. I was very touched. When I got home, I found that they had given me a red dress. I usually didn't like wearing bright colors, but this dress suited me well. On my birthday, before leaving, I called Felix, but he hung up. When I called again, his phone was turned off. The private detective told me that Felix was accompanying Sharon shopping at the mall. I knew he wouldn't come tonight. I settled the payment with the private detective and thanked him for his recent efforts. The private detective sensed that something was wrong with my emotions and called to comfort me. There are plenty of good men in the world, don't hang yourself on one tree. I smiled and thanked him. But he didn't know that I no longer longed for love, I was going to die. In these 2 days, the pain in my stomach had become more intense, and I couldn't even digest normal food anymore. I thought of giving Felix one last chance. If he could come to accompany me on my birthday, I would live a few more days. But I was wrong, his heart was as hard as stone. In the past, when Felix was angry, I would take the initiative to send messages and buy gifts to beg for his forgiveness. Presumably, this time, Felix was also waiting for me to bow my head. But this time I wouldn't bow to him again. I waited until the restaurant closed, drank the juice in my cup, and walked home in the cold wind. The terrace restaurant was far from home, and by the time I got home, the soles of my feet were bleeding. I put the flowers in a vase, took a serious bath, and put on makeup. I placed all the evidence from the private detective and my diary on the bedside, wore my wedding toast dress, and swallowed a whole bottle of sleeping pills. I set a funeral message to be sent to Felix and the hearse driver at 2 p.m. the next day. After arranging everything, I slowly closed my eyes. Before dying, my phone dinged, but I had no strength left to open my eyes and pick it up. So, I quietly left lying in the marital home. A golden light flashed, and my soul left my body and floated into the air. I looked at my face as I left. Despite trying to manage my expression, it was still full of unwillingness. I loved Felix so deeply, but until my death, he didn't know the pain I had endured during this time. My soul could only temporarily stay by my body, so I quietly waited for the hearse master to come and pick me up. I had told him the password in advance. When he pushed open the door with a suspicious face and found that I was really dead, he sighed deeply and said to the funeral director, "This girl arranged her own funeral. Until her death, there was no relative by her side. It's really pitiful." Then the funeral director saw the photo on the bedside and said, "It looks like she was married. I don't know where her husband is." After confirming my death according to the procedure, they carried me onto the hearse. My soul followed the hearse. I originally wanted to watch the entire process of my body's burial, but I was sucked by an inexplicable force to Felix's side. Sharon had been discharged from the hospital, and Felix was living with her in a suburban villa. When I arrived by Felix's side, he was staring at his phone, looking at the anonymous funeral message I had scheduled to send. What I didn't expect was that after reading the message, Felix rushed downstairs, hugged Sharon tightly, and choked, "I don't want you to leave, I will always be with you." Sharon was eating. After hesitating for a moment, she also opened her arms and hugged Felix tightly. She said with a touched face, "Thank you, brother, I know you are the best to me." That night, Felix took Sharon to ride the Ferris wheel, looking at her with tenderness the whole time. But only I knew that Sharon was going to leave him. The detective told me that Sharon had been in close contact with another rich second generation. Sharon was not the type to hang herself on one tree. As long as the man had money, it was enough to make her heart flutter. Felix stayed by Sharon's side all night, and Sharon couldn't even drive him away. Felix had a face full of sadness, and I floated aside, finding it amusing. Anyone with eyes could see that Sharon could eat and sleep well. How could she invite him to her funeral tomorrow? Thinking of this, I couldn't help but worry that if Felix saw Sharon alive, he would forget to attend my funeral. I anxiously circled around him, wanting to reach out and poke him but couldn't. After Felix woke up, the first thing he did was check beside him, but Sharon had already left. I don't know if it was planned, but Sharon received a phone call at night and left with her bag. I originally wanted to follow and see, but my soul couldn't leave Felix's side beyond 10 meters. Felix anxiously dialed Sharon's phone, but it always said, "Sorry, the number you dialed is turned off." Felix looked at the time and set off for the funeral home without even combing his hair. I sat beside him, looking at his tearful face, and sighed deeply. No matter who he was thinking about now, as long as he was willing to show up, it was good. He ran all the way and found my morning hall according to the message's instructions. He pushed open the door and shouted loudly, "Sharon." The funeral director was instantly dumbfounded and said, "Sir, you've come to the wrong place, the deceased is not named Sharon." Felix stepped back to confirm the address again and said, "The message I received is for here." Then the funeral director said, "The deceased in this morning hall is named Lynn." Upon hearing this, Felix was instantly stunned. He rushed in, looking at my coffin and photo, his face full of disbelief. After repeatedly confirming that the person in the photo was me, he grabbed the funeral director's sleeve and asked, "How could this be? How did she die? Who notified you to bring her here?" Seeing this, the funeral director truthfully told him that I had arranged everything in advance. Felix didn't know that if it weren't for the need for family members to sign for cremation, I wouldn't have wanted to trouble him to make this trip. But besides him, I couldn't think of anyone else I should trouble. Felix instantly collapsed in front of my portrait, crying, repeating over and over, "Lynn, how could you, how could you?" The funeral director handed my phone to him. Felix knew my phone password, and I really wanted to know how he would feel if he saw the chat records of Sharon harassing me. Felix sat on the ground crying for a long time until the staff reminded him that he needed to sign for my cremation. Like a walking corpse, Felix handled all the procedures for me. He asked his assistant to buy 2 bouquets of flowers and my favorite desserts for me. In the evening, it poured rain in Jiangqing. He held my urn and knelt in front of the tombstone for a long time, unwilling to bury me. I was anxious again, pacing around. Who wouldn't bury the dead promptly? It wasn't until it was completely dark that Felix put my ashes in. Before leaving, he touched my portrait once more. He went straight home and rushed into the bedroom to look for the belongings I left behind. When he saw the USB drive and diary I left on the bedside, he cried again. He contacted the hospital to inquire about my condition, but my attending physician told him it was my privacy, and I had specifically instructed that no one should be told. Seeing that communication was fruitless, he called the hospital director. The attending physician didn't know about my death and probably thought I was still clinging to life. Clearly, I could have lived another 2 months, but I didn't want to. I chose to die on my birthday because I wanted to pick an auspicious day for myself. If Felix had the heart, in the future, when he remembered my birthday, he could go to the cemetery to bring me a bouquet of flowers. Sharon had completely disappeared. I heard Felix's assistant report to him that Sharon's phone had been unreachable all day. I left evidence for Felix on the USB drive that Sharon's stomach cancer was fake. She had bribed her attending physician with a lot of money to deceive Felix together. But Felix didn't immediately open my USB drive. Instead, he started reading my diary. As my innermost thoughts were revealed to him, he trembled and cried with every page he read. But then I thought, he had been so indifferent to me before, he deserved this pain. He contacted my parents to inform them of my death. As I expected, they didn't care much about whether I lived or died. My mother only instructed Felix to arrange my funeral properly. All along, I had been dispensable in the family, and I was used to it. In their eyes and hearts, there was only my younger brother. The funeral director gave Felix the photos of me when I passed away. Felix held my photo and notebook, murmuring, "I'm sorry, if I had known earlier that you were seriously ill, I would never have left you at the wedding. But what's the use of saying this now? I once read a sentence in a book, which is more regrettable, being together but not reaching the end, or never being together at all." Before I died, I asked myself this question, and the answer was that being together but not reaching the end is more regrettable. I had clearly received all of Felix's love, but his love was fleeting. That night, Felix sat on the bed where I committed suicide, reading my diary over and over again. It wasn't until my phone received another push notification that Felix remembered to open my phone. When he finished reading all the chat records between Sharon and me, he clenched his fists in anger. Late at night, he made another phone call, demanding that the other party must find Sharon. I think he should be able to feel Sharon's two-faced nature in front of me and him. Thinking of how much he trusted and cared for Sharon made me so angry that I unconsciously clenched my fists. Early the next morning, Felix was awakened by his phone. The other party told him that Sharon had flown to Haicheng with a man. Felix immediately bought a plane ticket to chase to Haicheng. When he met Sharon arm in arm with that rich second generation by the sea, he rushed over, grabbed Sharon's wrist with red eyes, and asked, "Didn't you say you had stomach cancer? How come you're vacationing here with another man?" The rich second generation beside Sharon asked Felix in confusion, "Who are you?" Sharon forcefully shook off Felix's hand and said, "Let go of me. I'm not sick, it was a misdiagnosis by the doctor." Felix then took out their chat records and asked, "A while ago, you sent me messages every day saying you were unwell, pestering me to accompany you to the hospital. Have you forgotten? It's because of you that I missed accompanying Lynn through her last days. She died, she committed suicide, do you know that?" Sharon, seeing Felix's eyes full of red, was scared and hid behind the rich second generation, saying, "What does Lynn's death have to do with me? I didn't kill her." Seeing Sharon's indifferent attitude, Felix was so angry that he punched her. He said angrily, "It's because of you that she was so heartbroken that she committed suicide." What Sharon said next, I completely agreed with. Sharon snorted twice and replied, "That was your own decision, you can't blame me. The one you should blame the most is yourself." After hearing this, Felix was furious and rushed up to continue, but was stopped by the rich second generation beside Sharon. The rich second generation said to Felix with a cold face, "Don't be so impulsive, Sharon didn't do anything wrong." Felix's face turned red with anger, grabbed the rich second generation's collar, and punched him. The rich second generation was not one to be trifled with, and the two immediately started fighting, and Sharon couldn't pull them apart. They didn't stop until they were both exhausted. Seeing that Sharon was still alive, Felix flew back home overnight and opened the USB drive I left for him. The truth was revealed. Felix called the hospital director that night, saying he wanted to hold accountable the medical team that had accepted Sharon's bribe. Felix also contacted the company's legal department to pursue Sharon's responsibility. Felix sat in the study until dawn and received a call from his parents. His mother initially comforted him, saying, "Lynn's illness was terminal, don't be too sad and affect your own health." But how could Felix listen to those? He directly sent the evidence I left to them and said loudly, "I must make them pay the price." Soon, the doctor whom Sharon had bribed confessed everything. Sharon didn't love Felix, she was just unwilling to see such an excellent Felix taken away by me and simply wanted to force me to withdraw. In the end, the doctor and the nurses involved in the fraud were arrested. Felix found out the identity of the rich second generation Sharon was with and called him on the spot, telling him all about Sharon's actions. After learning everything, the rich second generation said straightforwardly, "You can deal with her as you wish, I'll just find someone else. This is the norm, no one is indispensable." Felix sent people to Jiangqing to capture Sharon back, imprisoned her in the basement, and subjected her to electric shocks and whippings alternately. No matter how Sharon begged for mercy, Felix showed no leniency. Felix even grabbed Sharon's chin and roared, "This is what you deserve. If it weren't for you pretending to be sick to gain my sympathy, I wouldn't have fled the wedding, and Lynn wouldn't have been so disheartened that she committed suicide." Sharon asked Felix, "You love Lynn, don't you?" Felix nodded and replied, "Yes, I love her. After she left, I realized how important she was to me." At the moment he said this, I couldn't help but shed tears. After being tortured for 3 days and 3 nights, Felix directly stabbed Sharon's heart with a knife and said viciously, "Go accompany Lynn in death. She indeed should be held responsible for bribing the doctor." What I didn't expect was that night, Felix returned home, cleaned himself thoroughly just like when I committed suicide, lay on the bed, and swallowed a whole bottle of sleeping pills. I could only watch quietly as he stopped breathing. Before he died, he said to the air, "Lynn, I'm coming to find you. In the next life, I will definitely marry you." After he died, his soul also floated into the air. When he saw me, he hurriedly floated over, held my hand, and choked, "I'm sorry, Lynn, it's all my fault, I neglected your health. I avenged you, did you see it?" I coldly shook off his hand and replied, "I saw it, but it doesn't change anything." His soul gradually became transparent before my eyes, and as he left, the hatred in my heart also gradually dissipated. My soul became more and more transparent until it finally disappeared into the air. In the next life, it's better not to meet again.